China finally showing signs of easing its border entry rules, the first time since COVID-19 broke out. The details yet to be announced. Boeing 737 MAX could be returning to China. Officials meet with the company years after the aircraft's grounding and 2 deadly crashes. The Pentagon pushing contractors to move supply chains out of China. This as the number of Chinese companies making the cut increases 5-fold. Nearly $260 billion, all for Shanghai infrastructure. China looking to boost the economy hit hard by COVID-19 lockdowns. But who's paying the bill? And the Chinese Communist Party expanding its international influence. Unofficial service stations under a Chinese police bureau set up outside China. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Chenny Wu, in for Tiffany Meyer. China is opening up a little. Beijing is now easing border rules for tourists. This after largely closing itself off from the rest of the world for over 2 years. Let's take a closer look.
China issued draft regulations on Monday, looking to improve tourism along its border and ease entry rules for foreign travelers. The draft says tour groups organized by travel agencies can enter China's border areas, but only through designated ports. The policy didn't specify whether those entering would still have to abide by China's quarantine requirements. That's 1 week of hotel isolation and 3 days at home. No further details have been revealed. China shares a border with 14 countries, including Russia, Mongolia, and Vietnam. Beijing has kept those borders closed since the pandemic began in 2020. Tourists have also been banned from entering the country. Now, just 4% of international flights take off daily in China, compared to before the pandemic. On top of that, China suspended 26 flights by U.S. carriers since February. That's due to passengers testing positive for COVID-19 after arriving in China. The U.S. responded by canceling a wave of Chinese flights.
An aircraft model from American plane maker Boeing is about to return to China. The company is negotiating with Chinese authorities. It comes 3 years after the model was grounded following 2 fatal crashes. Here's the update. China's aviation regulator said Tuesday that it had a meeting with Boeing last week. They talked about the 737 MAX's return to China. The jet was grounded globally in 2019, including in China, and deliveries of new planes were suspended. That decision followed 2 fatal crashes that caused hundreds of deaths. China's regulator said the purpose of the meeting was to review improved aircraft training plans for the model. After the meeting, Boeing leadership said the company would begin remarketing some jets meant for Chinese customers, adding that the company could not wait indefinitely while U.S.-China political tensions snarl deliveries. The plane maker said earlier this year that the delivery of about 300 737 MAX airplanes had still been suspended. About half of them were designated for Chinese customers. It also noted the outlook for selling planes to China in the near term, a year or two, was negative. A Boeing spokesperson declined to comment about the meeting with China's regulator. The Pentagon is pushing its contractors to move supply chains out of China. The Defense Department is on the move. It recently started using artificial intelligence to track whether the raw materials and parts that contractors use come from China. That's according to a report from the Wall Street Journal. This comes after the Pentagon stopped acquiring F-35 fighter jets from Lockheed Martin, after it found out that the alloy used for a magnet in the plane were sourced from China. Zooming out, a growing number of Chinese companies have made it into the Pentagon supply base. A report says the number was 655 as of 2019. An over 400% increase from a decade ago. Shanghai is looking to boost its economy. On Tuesday, the financial hub announced a nearly $260 billion infrastructure investment to be divided for 8 projects. It's part of the city's efforts to revive its economy, hit hard by the COVID-19 lockdown earlier this year. Here are the details.
Shanghai's economy saw a 14% slump in the second quarter, the worst performance out of China's 31 province-level regions. The city's infrastructure push appears to echo a tactic from the Chinese Communist Party's playbook, used to spur growth. It involves issuing debt to fund major public works projects. Shanghai's 8 infrastructure projects include a transport hub, urban railway improvement, and housing projects, as well as offshore wind power projects and a nature park. Recent months have seen the city's infrastructure investment pick up. Contracts have been signed for almost 600 projects, with investment totaling $134 billion. But a major question remains: where is the money coming from? That's as China's economy continues to cope with damage from the pandemic, lockdown orders, a real estate sector downturn, slacking domestic consumption, and dropping exports. In reality, the funding largely comes from Chinese citizens. Beijing instructed local branches of government to finish selling more than $70 billion in special bonds by the end of October. It was part of a carryover quota from 2019. On top of that, an annual quota of $520 billion will also help fund infrastructure projects.
A Chinese police bureau has set up dozens of unofficial service stations overseas, including in the UK. Experts say the Chinese Communist Party is looking to expand its influence internationally. Here's a closer look.
An investigation by the not-for-profit organization Safeguard Defenders says the stations are part of a program piloted by the Fuzhou Public Security Bureau. Named 110 Overseas Service Stations in reference to the Chinese version of 911, more than 50 stations have been identified overseas. The stations appear to be local numbers that overseas Chinese can call to report cases of fraud or document renewal. But some of the stations have been accused of blackmailing Chinese citizens to make them return to China. There are 2 such stations in London. One of the addresses appears to belong to an estate agent, but it's unclear what's at the other. Safeguard Defenders report said, while not the object of this investigation, at first glance, at least some of the associations abroad are tied to the United Front system. The report refers to the system that oversees the Chinese Communist Party's foreign influence operations.
According to Chinese media reports, Fuzhou City's Public Security Bureau has already gotten calls from Chinese people living in the U.S., Canada, and Australia. Talk of Marxism and Fascism appears to be growing in U.S. political dialogue, but some experts say the 2 ideologies are largely one and the same, with all roads ultimately leading to communism. Let's dive into analysis from Counterpunch host Trevor Loudon.
Where is the Marxist movement, if you will, in terms of influence? In what areas of society does this ideology have the most influence on that has you concerned?
Well, I think it's the extensive infiltration of mainstream politics, the military, the judiciary system, the bureaucracy. Look, it's in most things. It's in the churches. It's in the so-called LGBTQ movement is a Marxist movement. So it's in Hollywood, it's in TV, but the one that's really most concerning now, the aspect, is the deep penetration of the government, the organs of state, the CIA, the FBI, the military, the Justice Department.
Recently, we've been hearing the Biden administration refer to Trump supporters as semi-fascists. What do you think when you hear that comparison?
Well, who calls conservatives fascists? Stalin started that. That's a communist meme. The typical glance. If somebody calls a normal conservative or an American patriot a fascist, you can pretty much put a ring around that they're a communist. That's what they're doing. That's their standard modus operandi. So, that's Marxist talk. That's revolutionary talk. He is making an enemy. He's going to demonize that enemy, and he's going to crack down on that enemy because that enemy is all that's standing between him and a complete monopoly on power. When I say him, I mean the forces behind him.
In essence, how is fascism actually tied to communism or vice versa?
Well, look, back in the 1930s, there wasn't a lot of difference. You know, they were both collectivist systems. The state is everything. And the slight difference was that the fascists were more national socialists, and some of them had an anti-Semitic bent. In those days, there wasn't much distinction drawn between fascism and communism. They were brothers. It was Stalin, only really became a serious rift when Hitler betrayed Stalin and invaded the Soviet Union. And then it was all on. Then all the, up until that time, American communists were supporting the Nazis. American communists and British communists were supporting the Nazis. French communists helped sabotage the French military so the Nazis could invade France. They were all together. It was only when they had a falling out that we had this differentiation between communism and fascism, which is a very superficial definition separation at best.
That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here, after being demonetized for more than a year. Here's what to look out for in our second half. A look at the U.S. fentanyl crisis. Now, a certain kind of the deadly drug is targeting children, and the Chinese Communist regime has a part in it. NTD's Tiffany Meyer sat down with Anders Kaur, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk, to find out more. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Chenny Wu.